Hi everyone. Today we have Miss Zoe Sever. Would you like to introduce yourself in your own words and what are your passions in life?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. More than happy to describe a bit about myself. So I was originally trained as a clinical nurse, and that took place in Australia, where I'm from. And I then went on to do a research honors and then a master's in sexual and reproductive health. And today I am an accredited sexologist and I work as a clinical advisor consultant for my company Esme Health. And I also conduct research on interventions for sexual difficulties, and I'm pursuing a PhD in women's and reproductive health. Oh, and my passions, I nearly forgot, I'm sorry. That is a fantastic question. And I feel like we don't ask this often enough about what people's passions are. I would say in the context of the field, my passions are absolutely reproductive rights, about pleasure advocacy, gender equality. But in my personal life, it's probably more so exploring, whether that be different cultures, nature. I love rock climbing, mountaineering, yoga, things like that. So many passions, many pleasures.
That sounds very exciting. And it's especially inspiring to hear that you're working in a field which is so niche, but it's also so important for sexual and reproductive health rights. And I'm kind of curious, when did you first get involved in this field? Was it something that happened in your youth? Was there a particular experience that solidified your passion for sexual and reproductive health rights?
Yeah, it's a good question. I guess most people kind of wonder, is this something that you always wanted to do from when you were young and a child? And no, the answer is no. I didn't know that I was going to be a sexologist. It's kind of something that happened and really aligned with what I feel is important. But basically, through my clinical work as a nurse, I was able to witness firsthand this kind of disconnect and the absence of sexual and reproductive health. It's almost like the patient wants to ask about it, but they don't feel comfortable doing so, and they don't have the tools or maybe the vocabulary to do it in a way which they feel comfortable and safe. And then on the flip side, the healthcare provider, they also don't feel that they have the adequate training to address this, and that they don't know how to do it. Maybe it's going to make the patient uncomfortable. I'll just leave it. And so I almost witnessed like this, both sides are wanting to talk about it, and it's clearly something that needs to be addressed, the elephant in the room, and yet no one does. And so I was seeing this and I was thinking, wow, something is missing. And this is across the board. It doesn't matter what area you're in. This is a part of our health. It's an integral aspect of it. And I saw a TED Talk. It was a 2018 TED Talk from Emily Nagoski, who is a sex educator from the States. And it was about arousal non-concordance. Basically, when your brain and your genitals are doing different things. And I just thought, wow, people are actually working in this field. This is a field, firstly, and there's people working in it and doing incredible work. And I kind of just took a nosedive in, and I was like, wow, there's so much to be done. And it was at this point in my life where I was actually, I had an offer to do a PhD in sepsis. So looking at, infectious diseases and in child health. And I went, a bit down this path looking into this. And I thought, you know what? Sepsis and child health, it's incredibly important, but it's just not me. Like, this is my passion. This is what I love and I'm interested in. And so I went a bit left field, did this master's in sexual and reproductive health. And ever since then, it's kind of just been reaffirming for me, re-emphasizing the fact that this is it. This is my field. I love it. So to answer your question, I didn't know that it was something that I was going to end up doing, but I'm very glad that I've ended up where I am.
I love the transformative journey you've had, especially, I love the reflections you've made along the way. That's very inspiring. And what really struck me is that you said that you were a nurse and the experiences you garnered from that made your mind change into going into sexual and reproductive health rights? And most recently, in fact, you founded your own consulting company, Esme Health. Um, for me, that's pretty unique. I mean, you jumped from the healthcare industry to this femtech industry. So would you like to probably talk a bit about your journey behind starting your own company?
Yes, absolutely. More than happy to. I think it's interesting, these intersections between, like, there's healthcare, there's research, and then there's now business. And I think business and research and healthcare, they don't always go well together. So it's a very interesting place to sit, I guess. But basically, the reason why I started Esme Health was because I kind of emerged from my studies and I went, okay, what's happening in the field? And I started getting involved in projects and work, and found something incredibly concerning to me. And that was the amount of misinformation that existed around this. And something that I've learned is that it seems when you have a taboo topic, misinformation and kind of, these narratives that are really quite harmful, they spread like wildfire. They spread so much quicker. People are very vulnerable. They want the knowledge, but they're lacking the literacy skills, I guess, to be able to be decisive around, what sources it's coming from. And so I was witnessing a lot of harmful information being spread. And I guess the thing around this topic, and when we're talking about health as a whole, with any harmful misinformation, it means that you can see the impacts almost directly. It's not like it's something that doesn't translate into real people's lives. Someone can see something on Instagram and try it the next day and genuinely be hindering or harming their health. And so this was incredibly concerning to me, the lack of credibility, the lack of regulation around the field. And I felt like a lot of people were also starting these businesses, these incredible companies with fantastic visions. They want to do this impactful work, but they don't have the clinical backing and that scientific underpinning to what they're doing. And I think that needs to be in essence of like whatever it is that people are starting around femtech, which is a term basically meaning furthering the field around female bodies. And so I decided to start Esme Health to consult and help people with their clinical directions, their strategy, and ensure that there is that scientific underpinning to everything that they're doing, everything that they're claiming, and really bring a bit more of the research and the science side into the business side. So it's not without its difficulties at times. Of course, as I mentioned before, they don't always go well together, but I think it's incredibly important. And the companies that I'm working with, they recognize that. They recognize that science needs to be at the core of what they're doing. So yeah, that gives me hope. And I still see a lot of misinformation around there, and people that are very, they worry me because I think that the messages that they're sending can really directly harm people's health. But it's small steps, and a lot of people in this space are working towards the same thing of how can we get the most reliable and factually based information out to as many people as possible.
I'm so glad that you brought up the topic of misinformation because I absolutely agree with you. I mean, even though I obviously don't have much experience as you in this field, but the advocacy I've done in the past 3 years related to sexual and reproductive health rights, the number one problem is misinformation, but also the fact that even our unintentional actions, like if we just share a simple social media post, but we don't really look into, for instance, the references they're using, the citation, stuff like that, and then we ourselves do not know like the scientific reasoning behind that, but then we share it with our audience and then that spreads. So it's kind of unintentional, but it leads to this
Yes.
horrible ripple
And
effect.
I think it's so interesting that you've felt that as well. I think it's everywhere, and even it's getting very much echoed by other people in the space. And it might even be that they have years of experience in the space, and yet some person that, they might have a lot of followers. And for some reason today, a lot of followers equates with being more credible. But they also fall into the traps of these people thinking maybe, yeah, oh, I think that makes sense, oh, should be fine. But at the end of the day, I guess like you were saying, we have to really consider what we're doing and the impacts of it, because our actions definitely do have consequences. And I think this misinformation, it's all around us.
Yes, that's so true. And now this kind of brings me to my next question. You did speak about the misinformation you yourself witness around you. So, is there a particular personal story that you would like to share related to your broad work in this field? And did it have such a huge impact upon you, upon the work you've been doing in sexual and reproductive health?
Oh, I love this question. A personal story. I don't know if I have a personal story as such. I have what I would say is probably the many stories of people that I've spoken with and worked with, and people that have come to me. And I would say the essence of that and what's kind of changed my lens and my perspective is this one question that I get asked again and again. And that question is, am I normal? That is by far the biggest thing that I'm asked. And it's almost like, when I reflect on it, it's saddening in a way that people feel so that they're lacking the tools to feel in themselves that they are normal and to have that reassurance. I think because of the shame and the stigmatization of this field, people, they don't have the knowledge, and I think they're just really unaware, and they're scared to be different, and they don't know, if I'm different, what does that mean? So I would say that's the biggest thing that's probably changed my lens, is that question. And I'm very mindful of it now, that people are often coming from these places of insecurity, and they just want to fit in. They just want to be accepted and belong. And it can be things like, is my labia normal size? Very basic things that you would assume that everyone has the same awareness of, but they very much don't. And everyone's kind of grappling with their own unique thing of, is this normal about me? But I think when you take that to the sexual and reproductive health context, because it's not spoken about, people are very unsure, and often they're very desperate. They're desperate to hear that they are normal, and they're desperate for validation. And as we were mentioning with the misinformation, that's when they can be very vulnerable to these non-reputable sources, I guess.
Course, that's very empowering. And I totally agree, because the main reason why I started my advocacy was also because I asked myself that question, am I normal? Because
Wow.
yeah. So I personally come from like India, which is a very well, it's a country where many issues are stigmatized, and the main topic is about the woman's body. So for instance, issues like, even instance like, polycystic syndrome, or like simply menstruation, and like access to sexual products. Like, even there's this huge stigma currently in India that if you use a tampon, like, you use your virginity. And even like there's this whole social construct of virginity, and then, well, that's
Absolutely.
related to your purity and stuff like that. But it's
It
very
runs so
inspiring.
deep. It's so hard to, this is the thing about these topics, these issues, these problems, is that they're so complex. They're
Mhm.
so multifaceted, it's like layers upon layers of things to unpack. And it's very difficult. Absolutely. I agree. Like, it's not just using a tampon and that changing the shape of some of your anatomy in people's minds. It's no, losing my virginity, which is, a social construct. It's, what does that mean? Then I've lost my purity, then I've lost my worth, my value. So, and that's something that's taught for potentially, many, many generations. And it's so ingrained. People can't even grapple with the fact of, how can that be a social construct? What do you mean? Well, there's virginity testing. Of course, it's a real thing. So it's very difficult to unpack, I think, some of these complex problems. But I'm glad we're in it together, and many more, because we need all the help we can get.
Of course. And okay, this actually makes me curious. So I know with your experience in the field, you spoke about how this is so multifaceted and it's so complex. But then again, with of course, the whole social taboo and stuff, it's so hard to collectively find people with the same passions as yours, because sometimes even they are scared of speaking out in that space. So what really motivates you in those periods of times when you feel that, okay, should I be speaking out? Really, should I continue my work?
It's a very good question. And I think you have to take into consideration your own like personal circumstances around your environment. Like in some places, it's not necessarily so safe to loudly speak out to certain people about certain topics and our views on them. Unfortunately, that's a consideration in and of itself of like your everyone's own safety. For me, it's not so much safety, but I feel absolutely that there's times when there's so much stigma, shame, and taboo that it's very difficult to feel like we're making progress and to stay motivated. But what really keeps me motivated is all of the injustices and inequalities that occur around this, particularly to certain groups. And that just, it ignites in me like this fire of like, I need to do something. I need to be a part of this and helping to create change. And that's what drives me. I think when you understand the statistics, the more knowledge you gain around this field, the more you realize we are in trouble. Like there is so much that we need to do. We're starting way back here. And that is incredibly motivating to me because yeah, I think I'm an ambitious person and I see this challenge. And I think it's absolutely something that we can tackle if we collectively put our minds together. And so I'm incredibly optimistic and hopeful, as much as we are starting on the back foot, that there is room. And I want to see that change to these injustices and the inequalities. But that's definitely what drives me. I think probably for a lot of people in this space, it's coming to realize just how much of it continues to exist. And it can be shocking at times. People don't realize these things are going on in their own countries, in their own cities, communities. It's happening. It's all around us. It's just that people aren't necessarily aware of it because maybe people aren't vocal.
But I also wanted to know your opinion on, for instance, I recognize that I come from a very privileged place where my family was so open about me going into this field of advocacy. But then, especially for my generation, there's so much societal divide, and that all youth stand in such different social positions, which give them different privileges to speak about the issues they're passionate about, and sexual and reproductive health is just one of them. So what would your advice be to people, to youth advocates in specific, who want to fight for
Mm.
sexual and reproductive health but do not have the privilege to speak about that?
That is such a, it's a difficult question to say the answer to, because I feel like circumstances do kind of determine also the opportunities that we have. It's an unfortunate fact. Frame the question for me in a way of like, you would like basically some tips or advice for people of how, if they're coming from a place of different like privilege, for example, how they can overcome that barrier
Yes,
to
that's
do
right.
this work.
Mhm.
I think that if you think about it from a very foundational level, that's a lot of what is at the core of this. And so I think even if you understandings, these with people's identities, and you also come from a place potentially of how can I bring my perspective, which is different to other people's and everyone's varying perspectives into the context. Because I think when you have just people in, say, academia in ivory towers that are kind of determining what's happening, what interventions are going in, you lose a lot of the coloring of the picture. the context around it. And so I think, yeah, just recognizing that you come from a place where you have incredible experiences that are valuable, and that's going to inform the work you do. And it doesn't need to be anything crazy. If you want to get involved in this field, starting at the basics of advocacy, awareness and education, okay, how can I go about doing that? And it might just be creating a page and finding and going through the literature and figuring out what you're passionate about and trying to educate people. And that is a step. And that is something that's impactful and positive, and things kind of go from there. So it's a difficult question to answer, because I think I also come from what I would consider a place of privilege, and I don't have that perspective. But there's definitely ways. And the thing that I love about this field is that there is definitely people that want to help and support others to come into this realm, this field, and do other amazing work. It feels very different to say like healthcare or medicine, where it's kind of like people pitted against each other. It feels so supportive and like we are working together towards this common goal. And so I think just also recognizing that of there are people that I can reach out to and that will help me, because I can absolutely vouch for the fact that, yeah, people, they want to help. Feel free to reach out to me, to others in this space. And I have confidence that they will help you in whatever way they can to achieve your goals, despite whatever circumstance you might come from.
I agree as well. I think the space is so empowering, no matter how small it might be.
Yes.
I absolutely love that. And
I hope I answered that question correctly. I'm sorry. I tried my best, but it's
no, you
it's
were perfect. You're perfect. Thank you for that perspective. And this question is, I know this question, I've been asked myself, and I've been trying to ask people as well, because it is a quite sensitive topic to talk about. But it's about, so recently, the Roe v. Wade situation in the United States raised a global debate on the role of female identifying people in decision making processes about, our own body, and specifically about abortion rights. And I know that's a very specific topic to talk about, but it comes in the broader field of sexual and reproductive health rights, and what it means for our own autonomy and our own freedom. So I was curious, what are your views on this, the Roe v. Wade
Yes.
situation?
Look, thank you for mentioning it. I think as much as it is a very polarized topic, there's many conflicting opinions at play. I would be happy to share my own, to throw my hat in the mix. I think that the overturning of Roe v. Wade, it's very significant, not only for health, which I'll get to in a second, but also in the symbolic and political sense. I think it's also very significant. I mean, this has been the cornerstone of the reproductive rights movement for decades. And I think a lot of countries are also very scared looking at the states of what does this mean for us? And that's if they have, laws around these rights, because I think this discussion, it's brought to attention the fact that, okay, we have problems around abortion in some places. Access to abortion care is not freely or safely available. But there's also been many countries where this has been the case for a very long time, and it continues to be the case. So it's not just the states we're talking about here, but I think what it means in this case being overturned is just this major shift in the legal and social landscape surrounding abortion. We're seeing, as you mentioned, this increased polarization and conflict over this issue, but also a marginalization of people who need and rely on this abortion care. And I'm incredibly concerned, to be completely frank and honest about the situation. I think, yeah, it's becoming harder and harder for people in certain places to access abortion care. And if we limit access to abortion care, what it means is that more people are going to die. Like, we know that making abortion illegal, it's not going to prevent people from ending a pregnancy. All it is going to do is mean that it's going to prevent them from ending that pregnancy in a safe way, in a manner that's safe for both the mother and child. And that means that both that mother and child are going to be at a greater risk of dying. And that's the reality of it. And it's scary. But I think it's good to be frank about this, because we have these lawmakers basically impeding the decisions that should be between a patient and their doctor. And I personally believe that abortion, it needs to be a personal medical decision. And it also needs to take into account the individual patient's, their needs and their circumstance. And when you have like this broad law where it also doesn't understand, I feel like the policy and lawmakers, they also don't understand the intricacies in the medical space that they need to take into account. It means that people aren't able to get that personalized care. So I do recognize that people have, very different beliefs, and it's certainly not my place to judge or dictate what people do with their reproductive health, because that's their right. Just like it's people's right to have an abortion, and it's their choice to go on contraception, and it's their choice to have a pregnancy, and it's their choice to go on IVF or have certain fertility treatments. It is their choice. And I think it's just recognizing that and respecting that. And for people coming from this view of I'll never get an abortion, it's genuinely coming from a place of privilege, because it often means, well, fantastic, you won't get an abortion. Well, great. That means that it's not going to kill you. That means that if you have the child and go through with the pregnancy, you can still feed your children. You can still, have make an income and have your health and everything else that comes with that. You have social support. Fantastic for you. But not everyone is in that situation. And it's just recognizing that, acknowledging that this is an integral part of health. So yeah, I personally believe it is a personal choice, and we need to respect people's rights and that decision that is made between a doctor and a patient. And I'm intrigued, slightly worried, but intrigued to see where things go and progress, and if this has any follow-on effects to also other countries. I mean, people, they're very aware of what's happening in the States. They're watching. And I think, people's views over this issue, it's so heated, and there's obviously many layers, like we were talking before about sexual health, that come into their beliefs. But it's just respecting other people's choices, I think, is what it comes down to, and recognizing that we all have different circumstances, and abortion care is healthcare in essence. So yeah, that's my personal view on it and take. But it is absolutely concerning, and it's devastating to see.
Thank you for sharing your views. And I loved your view of how you said, this issue won't stop abortions. It will just stop safe abortions. That's so important, because I mean, it's not stopping people from getting illegal abortions. And it's so sad, because as you mentioned, it's a personal choice. And when like powerful institutions like the government take that choice away from you, it has such harmful, it I just think, it's so harmful upon your own autonomy as well. And then when facets like religion and I don't know, all these issues come into play, they
It
just make it
does.
more complex. It's just so not
And
true.
yes, I completely agree. So it's very complex, but I think a lot of people, I'm hoping that this kind of sparks this a movement in itself of like, you know what, no, we are going to fight for our rights. Like, this is infringing upon our rights here, and it's not okay. But I'm not sure what will happen. I guess I'm watching and waiting to see further changes to it, like the landscape, and it seems like views are kind of getting more and more extreme. So I'm not sure what's to come, to be frank.
I guess let's just hope for the best. But at the end of the day, it just depends. Like, do we remain constrained within what the government wants to enforce upon us, or do we just rise up against that forceful view, and then just take control over our own decisions, no matter, how polarizing that might seem. But yeah, that's very empowering. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's tricky though, particularly when there's, consequences to standing up and making your own
Mhm.
decisions if it's not legal or acceptable or safe. Like, yeah, it's very difficult. But yeah, sorry.
I
I could
know.
talk about this topic forever. I feel like it's
Uh-huh.
so multifaceted.
Of course. But thank you so much. This was such an enlightening conversation, and I'm sure our audience learned so much. And thank you so much for
Oh,
being here.
it's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.